Hello, my name is Edward Anderson. I'm a professor of supply chain and operations management at the McCombs School. I'm going to talk to you today about the supply chain major, what it is, why it's interesting, and why you should consider becoming one. I was asked to briefly give you a sketch of why I became a professor. It's essentially a long story, but just to shorten it to something reasonable. I was a new product development engineer at the Ford Motor Company. And part of my job there was integrating suppliers into the product development process and then taking that integration so that we could create products that not only delivered great functionality, but actually could also be manufactured. Now, I knew for other reasons that I liked teaching. I taught at Ford and I taught in other places as well. And I knew I liked research. And so the natural thing for me, given that set of interests, is to become a professor. And that's what I did. And I joined UT here in 1997. Never looked back. A note here. This has been a great job all along, but over the past year, because of COVID, there has been more experimentation done in supply chains than there had been in the last 30 years. And so my job has become more exciting than ever and more interesting. So, what is supply chain management? You know, I used to spend years explaining what supply chains are. Fundamentally, it's all about the steps of getting a product from raw materials to parts and sub-assemblies to manufacturers. Manufacturers make things like Teslas, for example. And then you need to get it through the customers, through distributors, through retailers, and so on. There's also a similar path for services as well. But having said that, nowadays, I don't have to explain what that is. My 86-year-old mother's friends all know what supply chain is, and they're all talking to each other about it. And all of a sudden, I've become very popular in those circles, which I would never have imagined. On the more serious side, supply chain management is crucial to the functioning of the economy. COVID, and even before that, various trade conflicts have shown how dependent we are on supply chains. Now, doesn't matter how good your product is, how good your service is, if you can't supply it to the customer, it's no good. And we have been short of a lot of things in recent months. Everything from really crucial stuff like medical supplies to fight COVID, to vaccines, but also, to computers for home offices. And even fun things like video consoles, Xboxes are in short supply. And the reason why those are short supply and now cars and trucks are in short supply is because there are shortages in the supply chain. One of the major shortages are semiconductor chips, but there are others as well. Now, at the same time, COVID may be over, but other things, trade war disruptions in particular, they seem to be on the rise. And so we need to do a lot more thinking about supply chain and how to make it part of the value proposition of our products, their continuity of provision and getting it to the consumer. At the same time, other things that have been popping up, ethical sourcing. There are a lot of suppliers out there that use low wage labor, sometimes slave labor, sometimes profiting from civil wars. And a lot of those things end up in products that we really care about, such as electronics, such as batteries, such as eventually electric cars, potentially. Also, if you really want to understand how to improve the carbon footprint, it's no good to just understand, for example, how an airplane or an automotive is made. you also need to understand what the carbon contribution of all those suppliers in the supply chain is in their manufacturing processes, and also how those parts are shipped from place to place. Finally, supply chain is the source of technological innovation. I was just talking about batteries. What has really made electric vehicles possible, practical, I should say, is, they've been possible. They've been running for like 50, 60 years. In fact, there's even some battery powered automobiles that existed literally around 1900. Why didn't they work? It was because of batteries. They didn't have enough power and controls, electronics to make them work. And oh yeah, there's another supply chain part, which is, you know what? If you want to drive your electric vehicle more than 100 miles, you're going to need a supply of energy. And interesting enough, this is where some of the energy companies are going. They realize that oil, not going to work. Gas, maybe some, because there's a lot less emissions, but you kind of want to get away from that too. You want to get to renewable resources. But what are they going to do then? Well, turns out we've got to get a lot of electricity out to, for example, Kearney, Nebraska, to power the Teslas and the electric vehicles from other companies as well. So in short, our job as supply chain managers, is to keep the economy running, people employed, consumer supplied, and to do it in an ethical, sustainable manner. So why does this matter to you? You're all business students. Supply chain is a worthy major, but does it make sense economically? Well, here's some thoughts and figures. Supply chain majors at the McCombs School have a very high ratio of jobs to students relative to many of the other disciplines. And so most of our students come out with multiple offers. Further, there are studies out there by, for example, the ACSM, which is a supply chain management umbrella organization, that show 88% of supply chain professionals, no matter what age group they are, where they are in their career, are happy with their career, and 85% would recommend it to others. I dare you to find many other fields that can claim that. Importantly, of those professionals, 70% of them have supply chain education. So it's not as if you can go from another field and then jump in without a supply chain major into becoming a supply chain manager. There's some other indications of popularity. Top 1% of searches on learning platforms have to do with where can I get a degree in supply chain management so that I can go into, presumably, being supply chain managers. Lastly, the jobs of chief supply chain officer and chief procurement officer. Procurement's another aspect of supply chain. They were on the rise even prior to COVID. And now they're dramatically on the rise. So it has moved from a back office function into a strategic function with a long career ladder. So who would make a good supply chain major? Who would find it interesting? Well, it is a multi-discipline major. Now, you have to be good at quants. You're going to need to be able to look at data. You're going to need to be able to build models. We'll teach it to you, but you've got to find that sort of thing interesting. And also, you have to have some IT skills. Again, we'll teach that to you. But, and this is key, you need to be a people person as well. Supply chain management is almost by definition a team sport because you're dealing with people from other organizations to make the products, provide the services that you need. And so you have to have a lot of interpersonal skills. You have to like being around people. You have to be good at communication, and you have to be good at collaboration. And oh, by the way, it's a good idea if you're good at negotiation too. But these people who are in the other organization you're negotiating with are collaborating with you. And so you have to figure out how to create win-win situations. So you have to be able to handle quants to some extent. You also have to be a people person, really important. And now, interesting enough, you have to be a strategist as well, because as I've said, things have changed and there are a number of supply chain strategic decisions that have to be made. In particular, you're probably all familiar with this. This was already going on before COVID, but now we're getting into situations where all those brick and mortar firms, think Walmart, think Dick's, think CVS, Walgreens, they have turned into primarily places where you would go into and you would buy your product, into hybrids, whether you can order online, you can have it shipped to you directly, or you can order online, you can pick it up in the store, or you can order online and pick it up curbside. All these modes have to be managed and somehow integrated. We have had students who have worked on those, and not only worked on those at, say, the high-level retailer level, but also the level of companies who are major suppliers to them. How do you make that work? It's hard. So, other things that are going on. One thing is we need a lot more scenario planning to deal with current disruptions and potential future disruptions. And as part of that is a lot about strategic decisions with respect to supply chain structure. One of which is simply to understand what your supply chain is. It's hard to believe this. 2/3 of companies, manufacturers in the US, only know who their immediate suppliers are, or those immediate suppliers plus maybe a few critical suppliers that are 2 tiers down. They know nothing about their 3rd, 4th, and 5th tiers. And without those, you can't do anything. You're missing bolts. You can't, in some cases, if those are special bolts, and a lot of times they are special fasteners, you can't put a car together. More commonly, what's happened right now is that semiconductor chips, which is a global shortage of, chips are in everything. You don't think of it, but they are. And so what's happened is we've got chip plants that go down in Asia. We don't get Xboxes. We don't get automotives. They're stopped. We don't get airplanes when they start building them again. We don't get computers. And so there are all these things that we need, which we can't make, and there's a shortage of, and it's because of chips. And by the way, the winter storm we just had in Austin, that contributed to this. The plants that we have down because of snow are going to be down a month, and that means automotive assembly in the Midwest, those plants are going to be shuttered a month. So, transparency first. Second of all, sourcing, fattening your supply chain. What we've been doing for years is leaning it out. Get rid of the inventory. Inventory costs money. Put everything in the cheapest possible plant and get economies of scale in, say, China. Not necessarily China. It could be Vietnam, could be Bangladesh, all sorts of places. But if one of those goes down, and it has happened, obviously with COVID, but there's also been natural disasters as well, all of a sudden, we're out of luck. And so what's happening is, I just mentioned chip plants. There are chip plants coming back into the US right now. Samsung is building a plant in Austin. It's building 2 more plants in Arizona. So there's a lot of reallocation going on there. But plants are expensive. Where do you put them? Do you put them here? Do you put them in Mexico? Do you put them in Europe? Or what's happening is a lot of times they're being put in all 3. But what are the ramifications with respect to cost? Is it worthwhile? The other thing that's going on is, like I said, there's been this reduction in inventory that's been done. But now it's, well, we don't want just in time, which is what thinning out inventory is called. No, what we really want is we want some more inventory. We want to fatten things up. In fact, warehouses are one of the biggest construction items going on in terms of growth right now. And so inventory, though, is expensive. So where do you put it? How much? It's in a lot of ways similar and supplementary to that multi-sourcing problem I talked about, where you put plants. We've got to understand these. And if we don't, we're going to be facing disruptions like we've had in the future, and we're not going to be able to get our products to our customers and not be able to make money. So, career paths. Any industry out there, from, as I jokingly say, semiconductor chips to potato chips, all require supply chain professionals. They have a lot of different names. So some are obvious: supply chain analyst, manager. Okay. But also sourcing, purchasing, or procurement manager. I've actually had students in the fashion industry, and they're called buyers there. Demand planning manager, logistician, and there are others. One of the more interesting one is consultancies oftentimes hire supply chain majors because they've recognized for years it's a major part of the value proposition. And so they not only hire, a number of companies, consultants have supply chain practices. They not only employ supply chain managers for that, but they also add in some of those majors, supply chain managers, end up in general consulting. And again, because supply chains are such a integral part of the value proposition. Some projects that our students have done, just to give you a flavor. We've had students who've actually helped with major companies, as I was talking about, with respect to all these different delivery modalities, digitalization, online, hybrid with brick and mortar, physical locations, and so on, and coordinating that. We've also had students work on 3D printing. 3D printing is really interesting. You know, I was talking about getting a bracket from, say, Bangladesh. It goes into a Tesla. You can't get that bracket, we've got problems. But if we had a 3D printer facility, and they can print metal, by the way, but there aren't many of them. If you had that as a strategic reserve, you could just say, Tesla, oh yeah, we can produce that bracket here in the US. And while it's going to be a lot more expensive than sourcing it from Bangladesh, we can do that in a pinch. We'll lose some money on the bracket, but we'll nothing like the millions of dollars if we can't produce products because of missing that bracket. And we lose millions every day. Now, real briefly, I want to mention that we also have a supply chain minor. So what would that mean? Say you want to do information systems or marketing. You can also take a minor in supply chain management. Now, this isn't going to make you a supply chain manager necessarily. Remember, it's a subset of the skills you'll be learning. But what it does do is it makes you a double threat that will increase your competitiveness in the industry. There's always need for information systems, understanding how they work with supply chains, because many information systems, that's what they do. Similarly, marketing, you want to do market research, you want to create a product, you want to advertise that product. Well, it'd be really good if you understand how you can deliver that product to your customer. So again, gives you an edge. So just to sum up, supply chain management is important. It's interesting. And it provides an excellent, satisfying, and well-paying career path. So I would urge you to seriously consider becoming a supply chain major. And with that, I thank you. To learn more, contact the McCombs Supply Chain Supply Chain Management Center, or the Supply Chain Management Student Organization has weekly meetings on Wednesdays. And I will leave with Professor Medina the contact information for those organizations. My thanks.